Welcome to the Left of Str8 Show, where we talk entertainment, music, books, foodies, and more each week with special guest interviews of interest to the LGBTQ community and our straight allies. Direct from the entertainment capital of Northeast Ohio. Your host, Scott Fullerton, chats with some of your favorite entertainers, celebrities, newsmakers, and behind-the-scenes people across the country and around the world who make it all happen. So sit back, grab your favorite beverage, and let's start talking.
Alrighty, guys, welcome back to the Left of Str8 Show, everyone. As always, I'm your host, Scott Fullerton, and we are here today with another fascinating conversation with an influential figure in the LGBTQ media world. Today, I'm delighted to introduce you to the talented and insightful Kyle Turner, a Brooklyn-based freelance writer who's graced the pages of esteemed publications such as Taste Magazine, The Village Voice, GQ, Slate, Vanity Fair, and the New York Times, just to name a few. Turner's latest literary endeavor is The Queer Film Guide, 100 great movies that tell LGBTQIA plus stories. It's an intriguing exploration of the queer cinematic landscape, and the comprehensive guide delves into the rich tapestry of LGBTQIA stories, chronicling 100 outstanding films that have not only entertained us, but also shaped and influenced our understanding of the queer experience as well. All the way from the somewhat distant past to the present, I'm excited to talk to him all about it today. So raise a glass, throw back a sip, and please welcome Left of Str8 Show for the very first time, the talented wordsmith, Mr. Kyle Turner. Kyle, how you doing today, boss?
Thank you so much for having me. That's such a generous and very kind introduction. I'd like to propose a toast.
All right, there you go. I usually have my coffee with me, but we'll fist bump, okay? There
Yes,
you go.
fist bump.
Boom,
Boom.
made it.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I mean, I am a huge LGBTQ entertainment buff, and suffice it to say, I did not know too much about your writing beforehand, but I have since just engorged myself with all of it. So exciting, the things. I love your take on things, and we'll talk more about that later. But since it's your first time on the show, do me a favor, Kyle. Give my listeners a little bit of background. Where did you grow up? What kind of a kid were you? And were you always kind of interested in writing, or how did that career path come about?
I grew up in Connecticut. I'm adopted, and so I film and media was definitely an avenue to sort of like better understand the world around me. I remember my mother showed me Bringing Up Baby when I was like 4 or 5, and that's sort of my apocryphal origin story. I never really looked back, and I knew from second grade on that I wanted to write about film or be involved in film history in some capacity and write about it. And I was always slipping in things about movies into my homework, in my math homework, which never really made sense. But then I started writing on the internet around my sophomore year of high school, and then started pitching to publications around senior year of high school, freshman year of college. And I did film studies at University of Hartford before I decided to move to New York in 2016. And I also like started a blog when I was 13. So there's a lot of the desire to write or write about film has been within me, so to speak, for as long as I can remember. Honestly, it's been a really useful creative expression and way to sort of unpack cultural artifacts around me and how they are reflective or emblematic of the social or political or cultural landscape around me. So I've always loved film and trying to engage with it in a meaningful way.
Very cool. Well, like I said, the writing is just amazing. I've kind of took some deep dives into a lot of your stories, and we'll talk about a couple of them later on. You're openly queer. Let's talk about that for a second. When did you first come out to yourself? When did you? Who was maybe the first person you came out to, and when do you think you finally found your tribe, if you have found one?
I came out to myself in probably like a fairly banal way. Like in high school and throughout like my adolescence, I was read or interpreted as queer, but I didn't come out until like I was 19 because I didn't want to give other people the satisfaction of being right. And it wasn't until like I remember I was home from college for the weekend, and I was doing my usual weekend trip, which was I would go to the local library and get some movies, and then I would go to McDonald's for lunch and get lunch there, and then I would go to the grocery store and get a pint of ice cream, and then walk home, and that would be like my weekend. And there was one day in the summer where I just looked at a tree that I had walked past many, many times. And I thought to myself, I guess I like guys as well. Because previously I was very adamantly pursuing the girls in my school and like serenading them with Cole Porter songs, which should have been a signal. But and by evening I was just like watching gay porn and whatnot. But I finally came out to myself around 19 looking at that tree. And then I think one of the first people I told was my best friend who I've known since high school. His name is Joe Brady. He's also in the film industry, and he's one we've known each other since orientation, and it was very 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 meaningful for him to be as kind and accepting. And he will be somewhat embarrassed by me saying this, but he was very emotional about it, more so than I was. And I think that's a very, very much a testament to our close bond, the fact that we could share that moment together. And I was sitting in the back of his car for some reason, because we had just gone, I think, to see a movie or some such. And then I have found my tribe sort of like in different stages and in different contexts. I spent 2 summers before I lived in New York, living in Provincetown and working as a houseboy, and so I sort of was able to cultivate a community there. And it was the first time I really delved into a kind of queer sociality, as it were, because in Connecticut, I didn't drive and I didn't have a license, not because I'm Asian, but because I'm gay. That is a joke, for the record. You're allowed to laugh at that. And
Love
so
that.
there wasn't like a lot for me to do there. So when I sort of like dove into living in Provincetown, um, it was different from having like experienced or interacted with queerness kind of through some mediating form, like documentaries and books and film and television and whatnot. It was the first time that I was like interacting with a queer community, and that was very meaningful. And then when I moved to New York, I have accumulated a really wonderful group of friends and a community that means a lot to me. Um, and it's interesting because a lot of that sort of seemed to be mostly one-on-one relationships, which is fine, and whatever makes sense for the person involved. But in the last couple of years, after or as lockdown has lifted and as the pandemic has changed and shifted, I've really become close with a group of people, which has meant a lot to me. I've really found like a tribe, as you were saying, of my people, and that has been really transformative in a way that I was not necessarily expecting. So I appreciate the way that friendships and interpersonal relationships, even though sometimes it can be hard to experience in the moment, I appreciate the way that they do evolve and change and morph over time, even if it means that there's ebb and flow. I think the joy that those relationships are able to bring you in the moment is what's most important, and the meaning that you're able to make from them.
Very well said, and very love Victor-esque with your best friend there. I like that.
Although I was not perusing the internet under like a fake screen name, for the record.
There you go. Okay, there you go. All righty. All right. Well, we're going to get to the book in just a little bit, but I want to kind of go over some other stuff that I thought was interesting and fun. And I want to talk about your writing style because, like I said, I read quite a bit of it. And I think it's very kind of erudite, sophisticated. I love that you don't talk down to your audience. I love that it's a very well written pieces, everything that I've read. Talk about your style. Has that always been your intention to do that, or is that just how you speak?
I really appreciate the kind words. Part of it is this is just the way that I speak. I was telling a friend recently that in the last year or so, I've tried to be a little bit more fun, and so I've been leaning into my vibe being Niles Crane if he tried to slay, which is young people. Young people speak for like trying to be fun. But anyway, I have cared about writing as a craft, at the risk of sounding somewhat pretentious or um, what have you. For a very long time, I figured out that I was pretty good at it when I was in middle school. Around uh, third or fourth grade, I started entering local writing contests and doing pretty well in them. And I think in the last 3 or 4 years, I've when did that Stonewall movie come out? That the Roland Emmerich? That was 2015, actually. I think
Right. Yeah, that was
20
good.
around 2015, like 2015, 2016. I think I really started to pay attention to the way that I could structure a piece, and that the language could be reflective of what the cultural artifact was trying to do. Um, because what's most important to me when I'm writing is that I'm engaging with like whatever the thing is on its own terms and on its own level and not condescending to it or condescending to my audience. I want to treat it seriously. I think the best thing that you can do with any film or TV or play or book or whatever is to like treat it seriously and really think about what the thing's intentions are and engage with that. And um, I want my writing to reflect that I do want to think about what this film is trying to achieve, what it means in a broader social or cultural context, what it means in the context of like a lineage of filmmaking or of queer art making and creativity. And so yeah, I've also been thinking more recently about my vocabulary, and I want to be able to find um, a way of expressing what a thing is doing, and not just in terms that are direct, but also can illustrate um, as vividly as possible what I've experienced as a viewer or a spectator. I guess my critical ethos, to sum it up, at the risk of rambling, to sum it up, my critical ethos is if you can't say anything new, say it better than anyone else.
I love that. Now, I think, like I said, I appreciate good writing, and this is just good writing. I think I only had to look up 3 words, so I wasn't doing too bad. I try to keep myself as up to date as I can, but I just love the style. And you kind of hinted at it. Talk about that. You, of course, write around themes of queerness and entertainment and everything, but do you have what is your passion to a project? I mean, you do writing for hire, you do things that you're interested in. What is the parameters of something you have to have for you to really take an interest and write well about it, do you
That's a good question. Some of it is by necessity, in as much as I have a day job, but I've been freelancing on the side for almost a decade at this point. And so some of it is just, I get an assignment, or I'm asked to do something, or an editor approaches me and says, "Are you interested in this?" And as the drag queen Willem once said, "If you have a check, I have a talent."
think?
But the things that tend to most interest me are not only queer films and media, but also things that are actively engaged with identity construction, with desire. I love writing about desire and sex on screen, partially because I think that there's this like ongoing feedback loop with how we understand our own sexuality and how that is sublimated or depicted and dramatized on screen, which then influences or shapes how we understand our sexuality and how we understand desire in terms of how it works with other people and how other people negotiate their sense of desire and self. So I'm especially interested in those things. An example would be the new Amazon series Dead Ringers, which is not explicitly about like filmmaking or anything, but it is very much about desire. It's a loose reworking of the David Cronenberg film with Jeremy Irons, but this version stars Rachel Weisz as twin OBGYNs who have an extremely codependent relationship, and whose birthing center is funded by like a Sackler-esque heir. And it very much asks these fascinating questions about like, where does our desire come from? How does the self get created? Are we ultimately doomed to sort of relitigate the question of what our identity is over and over again, with no ultimate answer, that we are just constantly reconfiguring who we are, and both to ourselves and to other people, just on a second by second basis. And I love questions like that. I love the way that film and television has the capacity to both unpack and deconstruct, as well as continuously ask the audience those questions.
Very cool. I love that. All right, I love that. Let's talk a little bit about you have apparently an affinity to James Bond, the company. We talk about different things. I love that you pull things back. Like your reference to Joaquin Phoenix and the Joker was in a couple pieces in different areas. I like how you're able to kind of use something and pull it apart and kind of use it in different areas to show examples. What things resonate enough for you to give it a second glance?
I think there has to be something identifiable where within it I either know that something's going on there and I haven't yet um, found the vocabulary to articulate what that is, or it's kind of bad. Like
Right.
I love a bad object. I love something that's like not very good, because I recognize that um, filmmaking is a, an arduous collaborative effort, um, and that it takes a lot of work to do. Uh, and I think because of that, it makes the process of engaging with movies so much more interesting. It's easy, especially on the internet, to sort of dismiss things wholesale, and I'm guilty of that as much as anyone. But like Joker, for instance, not a very good movie, but I think it one sort of was released at an interesting time, very much post Dark Knight, in the era of comic book movies either taking themselves extremely seriously or being very very silly and frivolous, even if they're like also kind of CIA propaganda. Um, that Joker is crafted in a way that is pushing the audience to make these connections to older films, especially that take place in New York, sort of pushing the audience to make these connections about an idea of what New York is, an idea of what mental illness is, honestly, and an idea of like how stand-up comedy works. I'm really fascinated with that. And the thing, and also what's fascinating about Joker is it won the Golden Lion at the Venice International Film Festival, and the president of the jury at that time is the Argentine filmmaker. Um, oh gosh, I just blanked on her name. She made La Cienega, and The Headless Woman. Oh, Lucrecia Martel. Lucrecia Martel is a fantastic filmmaker, and she's
I
always
would have been no
observing.
help there. I'm so glad you got
Yeah,
it.
she's an incredible filmmaker, and she's always observing like the slight ruptures and fissures that exist in class malaise, and especially upper class malaise. And so the fact that and she's also like a huge comic book movie fan, which is interesting to me. She was on the short list for Marvel to direct the Black Widow movie, but when they told her that they had a second unit directing team that would handle all the action sequences, she said no, because she wanted to do all the action sequences. So the fact that Joker spoke to her makes it, to me, a really interesting object, even if it's not like a very good movie. The fact that um, it has this role within the culture, that it seems to be purging all of these like anxieties about masculinity and about especially white masculinity in this time. And again, the fact that it's coming from the director of The Hangover, there are all these different elements that even if they don't necessarily cohere together, I think looking at them as a sum is really compelling. And my interest in James Bond is somewhat based in nostalgia. I was really into James Bond when I was a kid, and I do think that the movies are really, really rich um, texts and cultural artifacts because they are the ghosts of British imperialism trying to like remain revived in the form of like this long running movie franchise. And also they're like fun. I genuinely think that they're fun, solid action movies. And seeing them evolve, especially in like a post Cold War world, is really, really interesting. I have a James Bond for those playing at home, I have a James Bond phone case, actually.
Nice.
Yeah.
I like it.
Hmm.
And also, one of the things I like, and kind of in the vein of what we are just talking about, is I love that you're not afraid to kind of poke holes in almost reverential things to the gay society, like the inheritance and different genres and stuff. I love that fearlessness, and it's well thought out. So, talk about a lot of people won't go there. What makes you kind of keep that honesty about you?
Um, Thank you very much. I really, really appreciate that. Um, I I think it is in has I think it has to do with an innate skepticism that I have. Like I always want to like something. I always want to be provoked or provoked to either feel or think about something. And even when that doesn't work, I think it is especially important. I think it's especially important when the thing doesn't work for me. And if there's like an overwhelming consensus about something, I do have a little bit of skepticism and like this can't be that good, right? Like I think it is worth questioning consensus. I think it's worth um, interrogating the way that certain, especially queer uh, objects or pieces of pop culture are revered, because that then reveals what queer culture writ large. Obviously, like everyone has their individual taste, but it does reveal like what we have come to value, what we are looking for, or what we are settling for as far as queer aesthetics, as far as queer representation. Um, and if someone doesn't do that, I wonder like what would it mean for the evolution and the status of these queer and LGBTQ pieces of media if no one is going to question it. I don't feel like I for the record, there are other really brilliant, wonderful writers who are doing similar work who like Caden Mark Gardner and Willem McClay. Willem McClay Caitlin, and Juan Bartin. They're all really wonderful writers who also are have like a healthy level of skepticism over things that are like revered or overwhelmingly loved by queer audience. And I think what's also interesting is that when something is embraced, for the record, there are lots of things that have been embraced by the queer community that I do love, like Angel High's Weekend or Barry Jenkins' Moonlight, Cabaret, etc., etc. But when those things do become they because there is a very fraught history with the cultural objects that have been available to queer audiences. There and because queerness encompasses so many different experiences and so many different ideas and so many different fluid uh, conceptions, there's not necessarily an agreed upon sort of rubric of aesthetics. And so it's really interesting to me that because there isn't this agreed upon rubric, to think about what that rubric might look like, the way that it might fail on those terms, the way that it might expand what the rubric should or should not be. So I'm always interested in what these cultural objects say about us and what we want out of queer creative expression. Does that make sense?
It does, and I appreciate it so much. Like I said, I think we can't just do homage to everything. We can't be reverential in everything. We do have to kind of talk about that. Last thing we'll talk about before we go into the book, because I founded this podcast 7 years ago on wanting to talk about queer things, entertainment, foodies, and books. And you took two of my favorite things with Lasagna Time with Billy and Kyle. I'm ready to kick Billy to the curb or make it a threesome. Reboot it. We're going to join Sarah there because I just think that's an amazing concept. Talk about that concept and how, do you have fun doing it as much as it sounded?
Oh yeah, I do this podcast with my close friend Billy McEntee. It's called Lasagna Time with Billy and Kyle, and it sprung from COVID restlessness. I wanted an excuse to talk to people. I wanted an excuse to talk to people about culture, to not only to create connection, but also because I felt my conversational skills were languishing and withering during that time. And I just sort of threw it out onto the internet. I was like, would anyone like eat lasagna with me and just talk and do a podcast? And Billy responded, and we started texting, and it eventually evolved into this podcast where we talk about the role of food in storytelling and pop culture, which has been a really fun process. We're our lives in the last like few months have gotten busier, so we haven't had a chance to record most recently, but we are trying to definitely get back to it. And it's been a lot of fun talking about different examples such as Phantom Thread with the mushrooms, of course. We did Hello Dolly with R. Thomas, which was really, really wonderful. And the delicious scene of Dolly Levi just feasting at the Harmonia Gardens. And we did an episode, we've done episodes on girls and Please Like Me. And it's been really exciting and fun to explore other people's relationship to how food is depicted on screen and in storytelling and pop culture, and what it means to us as viewers who often love food and often love media, and how those two are find a marriage together.
I love it. I'm mad I didn't think of it first, but like I said, we'll kick Kyle to the curb. It's a threesome, my friend. I love it. Let me know if it comes back.
Yes, we tried. I initially pushed really hard for us to be actually eating lasagna as we recorded, but our producer was like, "That's not something you can do. That's gonna sound awful on mic."
I love it. All right, well, let's jump into the book, my friend. The book is called The Queer Film Guide 100 Great Movies That Tell the LGBTQIA Stories. Launching May 16th, we have a bunch of events we're going to talk about a little bit later on here. Tell me why this book, what you thought you brought to the table, and maybe anything that surprised you along the journey of writing it.
Um, I was approached by Smith Street Books last May to write this book, and they wanted to do they had previously done a book called The Feminist Film Guide, and the author of that one, Mallory Andrews, a really wonderful critic. She was one of the primary editors of the Clio Film Journal, which was a feminist film journal based in Canada, and she recommended me to do this, and I was like, yes, absolutely. And it was a real privilege to I've cared about queer film for both like a personal part of my life, but also a professional part of my life for a very long time. And so it was a real privilege and honor to be able to sort of put that on the page. And I know that there are, you know, problems and issues and worthy questions about canon making, as we saw with like the Sight and Sound list that was published by Sight and Sound magazine. It happens once a decade, and there is necessarily or by design a level of exclusion, and especially with like larger canons, there is tends to be an exclusion of queer filmmakers, and this was an opportunity to sort of one offer a offer and if not an antidote, then at least an alternative to those kinds of lists. But also with the awareness that by creating a list that I was probably also going to make the same mistakes in some way. And so uh, I want to be clear that this is a guide, even though the title is the queer film guide. This is a guide. This is an example of ways that you can find and explore queer film for anyone who's curious about it or who has some knowledge of queer film and wants to explore it more in depth. The reality, though, is that lists and canons and listicles and whatnot are useful just on a pragmatic level. I hope people, when they look at lists, when they look at my book, are inspired and motivated to explore beyond my book. I've managed to actually squeeze in 200 films because there are recommendations and pairings for each entry, and I hope even with those that they explore other styles of film, other filmmakers, other movies made by the same filmmakers within the book. And it was a real privilege to look at all the lists that exist on the internet and try to create one that was able to express both the publisher and my unique point of view about queer cinema. And I was able to source from. I looked at a bunch of lists, and then I looked at all the books that I have, books at the library, and this book would absolutely not exist without the help of some wonderful film critics and scholars such as Juan Barquin, who I mentioned earlier, Fong Lei, who's a critic based in Paris, um, Liz Purcell, who's an archivist who specializes in the history of gay porn. Those people were really, really instrumental in helping me compile the book and keep me in check in a way.
Right. Well, it's absolutely marvelous, and we'll talk about kind of the sections. I mean, one of I think the most genius ideas and the most insidious to a guy researching like me is there's no table of contents, so you can't go,
I
"Ooh, I want to see
know.
this, this, and this." So it's kind of fun. It makes you explore them all,
Yeah.
which I thought genius. I'm loving that. So I love that part of it. I love, like you said, you talk about the queer view mirror section, which kind of gives you those comparisons and if you like this, look at this, and you also have the see other sections. It does kind of the same thing. So it's great to kind of have all those comparisons, and the illustrations are so 1920s, 40s kind of talk about Andy Warren. I love that part of it as well.
Oh, I'm so happy with the illustrations. Andy Warren, who is an illustrator based in Australia, he did a magnificent job. I was really excited to see what his take was going to be on the films and how he was going to sort of find their essence and find a graphic way to express them. And some of my favorites that are in there are the one that he did for Weekend, which takes the image of the two characters in bed, and so it finds the the shape and geometry of their intimacy, which I think is really interesting. And then another one that I really loved was Cabaret. Of course, you have the iconic bowler hat with Liza Minnelli and the little fake beauty mark that she has. That's like a gem or something. Really love
Right.
that. I really love the Angels in America one. I feel very lucky that I got to sneak in what is technically a mini series. Um, but it feels as expansive as the show itself does. So I was really thrilled that it looks so beautiful. And I think besides being proud of the writing and being proud of having like an exciting point of view to offer about queer film, I think it's a nice object. It looks good. It looks like you can have it on your shelf or on your coffee table.
It does, and thank you for a little advance copy. I feel very honored, and I fell in love with every piece of it. And I also I love that it's chronological. I mean, we're starting back in 1922. We're talking over 100 years of filmmaking now in it,
Hmm.
and I love that you said that it's a jumping off point for a lot of people that haven't seen these because you can't be comprehensive, right? There's queer films everywhere. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure I have a couple of my favorites that I'm sure was off. Have you come across anyone and people previewing say why didn't you do that or anything that you're kind of upset that you might have missed, or just you got to let it live the way it is?
Um, I I'm of two minds. The book is done and it's out and it's about to be out in the world, so you have to let it live, as you were saying. There are a couple things that I wish that I had included, but even I feel like I got away with a lot as far as being able to include all the 100 main entries, which took a bit of time to compile, and then the original list was like 186 films. It took time to compile and then winnow down to the final 100 and then create the pairings to go along with that. And I've definitely encountered movies that I kind of wish that I was able to include that had to be cut out for because of the parameters. But I hope that again, this is a jumping off point or a motivation, or a motivator for people to explore what isn't in the book. I think that's as important, if not more so, than what is in the book. Because one of the reasons why I am really proud of it is because if there are many best film lists that exist and they routinely exclude queer voices, I hope that this is an example or a counterpoint to that. And two, if there are many Googleable queer best films list, this is like a physical version where hopefully I have asserted what is unique and interesting about queer cinema in a physical way.
Very well done. Like I said, and if I could be corny for a second, I don't think the list will self-destruct in 13 seconds. I think that you will have a long life of this book, and it's just a great jumping off point. I learned some new things that I didn't know, so I thought it was fantastic. As I said, you got lots of events. You're gonna be a busy boy the next couple weeks. We're officially launching May 16th. You have something to do with Chucky, which I didn't even know had LGBTQ canon in it. You have the
Uh-huh.
official launch where you're gonna have drag queens. Talk about some of these great events you have coming up.
Oh my gosh. I'm really thrilled and excited to have been able to do some events for the book. These are I maybe dropped the ball as far as doing things sort of like outside of the New York area, but one person can only do so much. But if you are in the New York area, I do have some really fun events going on. I'm screening Seed of Chucky, the horror movie, with Matt Zoller Sites at the IFC Center on May 15th, and I'll be there for a book signing and conversation there. It'll be very exciting. It'll be on 35 millimeter, which is very cool.
Nice.
And the big event for me though is the Queer Film Guide Live, which is I'm so excited. It's going to be this incredible drag celebration of the book. There will be drag queens like Julie J, Miss Mamshi, Amygdala, the illustrious Pearl, Sweaty Eddie. I think I have everyone, but they will be doing numbers inspired by some of the selections in the book, and it's being co-produced by June Buck and Ethan First, who are very good friends of mine and very much invested in community, and in uh, the possibility that queer community can offer. So we're really making that event an opportunity for people to connect beyond the films, but just like in a physical space. And I'm so thrilled and excited for that. And then I've also had the privilege to curate 10 films at the Museum of the Moving Image, which is one of my favorite movie theaters. And we're doing a series called Queer Cinema Top to Bottom. So there are 10 films that are divided into three sections. Um, the idea for the series was queerness as subtext or supertext. And so for subtext, which are the bottom films, we have films like The Fly and Morocco, Rope, and Jennifer's Body. And then for the films where queerness is like a defining aesthetic or sensibility or point of view, which are the tops, we have Corel, Farewell My Concubine, Nitrate Kisses, and O Phantasma. And for the films that are self-reflexive and are actively exploring the creation of desire and the way that identities can be constructed through cinema itself, which is Verse. We have Mulholland Drive and The Watermelon Woman, and that is going to be running from May 20th to July 2nd. And then I'm screening The Wedding Banquet on 35 at the Nighthawk Prospect Park on May 25th. And then at the Jacob Burns Film Center, I'm screening Toshio Matsumoto's Funeral Parade of Roses on June 26th, and I'll be in conversation with my delightful and wonderful friend, Monica Castillo, who's the senior curator there and also a wonderful writer. And I'm very excited to have these events going on, but I'm also tired. Excited and tired.
It's going to be amazing. Then you can take a month to party at Pride Month and then a month to relax and then take it on the road, my friend. You're good to go.
Yes, exactly.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations. Like I said, book is amazing. We're going to have you to come back with your next adventure because I'm having such fun talking to you. Last thing I'll ask, I mean, you are such a prominent voice in the LGBTQ media as far as I'm concerned. How do you see the landscape of queer journalism kind of evolving over the next few years? And how do you want to be a part of it?
My gosh. Thank you for the question. It's a complicated question or a complicated answer because we are at a time where the institutions that were once responsible for being able to function as a platform or an apparatus for anyone's voice, regardless of queer voices, but at this point, anyone's voice, they are crumbling. The media industry is not looking good. There have, in the last week and a half, two prominent media companies, including BuzzFeed News and what was
Paper, I
it?
think. Was it paper?
Paper Magazine. Yeah, they've closed their newsroom and laid off their staff, and it's so awful. I feel bad for everyone involved. I am in the kind of lucky position in having a full-time job and freelancing being an additional source of income and a side thing, but it's still an additional source of income. It's still something that is an important part of my life.
Sure.
And it's really frustrating to see all these like venture capitalists sort of think that they want to invest money in really crucial and important platforms where people, especially of marginalized identities, who now have like the agency to be able to express their ideas and their writing and whatnot, not being able to do so because there just isn't a level of security or sustainability anymore. And I talk about this with friends a lot, and I try to see the silver lining in that, you know, a decade ago we didn't have necessarily as many writers of color or queer writers in positions where they could have a platform to write about queer film or write about anything really. They have queer voices have frequently been in the margins in the media industry, and as that has changed over time, the problem has been that the places that would have served as those platforms are now, falling apart. And while I think it's good that more writers of marginalized backgrounds there is a level of democratization where they can have a Substack or they can have a Medium and whatnot. They're just like they aren't able to offer the same security as a staff position or even a permalancer position, which isn't a wonderful alternative, but it is at least an alternative. So it's very complicated, and what is also really frustrating is that a lot of the editors who are working these publications are overworked and underpaid, and they aren't able to give the attention and mentorship that a lot of these writers need. I was really lucky that I had a network of friends and a network of writers that I was able to connect with when I first started, and that is kind of thanks to Twitter. Honestly, I was able to connect with other critics on that platform and really engage with them, and they taught me a lot. Twitter is definitely a mixed bag, but it was definitely instrumental in helping me create my career and make me a smarter, better writer, because of the people that I was able to meet through it. And so I feel very bad that, like, even though these writers are do sort of like have some options, they don't necessarily have the same resources as I did when I was starting. And I hope that changes. I hope that there is meaningful change within the industry to be able to support the voices and the writers and creators that need it. And I would like to be part of it in any way that I can. I try to be supportive of any writer who approaches me and has questions about how to freelance. I mean, I taught myself how to do it, so they're basically, if they come to me with questions, I will do my best, but my ability as a resource may not necessarily be like a J school level, like introduction or anything. But I definitely want to help, and I definitely want to be a part of meaningful change. I think the Freelance Solidarity Project is a really great resource. There's also Study Hall, which is a listserv, which is a wonderful resource in terms of asking questions about like what you can do as a freelancer, what are the mistakes that other people have made, what are the questions as far as how to source different interviews and different publications, different editors and whatnot. There are resources available, but they've had to be conceived because the actual institutions and the actual platforms that once existed are not doing the job that they should be doing.
Right. Well said. And we just got to keep your voice out there, my friend. I appreciate you so much. Congratulations on the book. Let everyone know where they can find the book when it comes out on May 16th. And if they want to follow you on social media, because you have some great opinions on there as well.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. This was a real pleasure. I really appreciate your questions and asking me about my writing, because I still kind of sometimes feel like, a little kid in Connecticut gets to sort of live his dream and write about movies. And I appreciate that someone has noticed that I care about my writing. So thank you very much for your questions. You can find me on the internet at Tyle Kerner on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. That's TYLEKURNER. It's just a spoonerism of my name because I'm very creative. And you can also find me on the internet writing for places like GQ, W Magazine, and the New York Times. And you can find my website at tylekerner.com. And you can also find all the events there that I rambled through. But thank you again so much for having me. This has been so much fun.
It is my absolute pleasure, my friend. Stick around and we're going to do a little 5 questions in a bit. Guys, the book again, The Queer Film Guide.
The Queer Film Guide, 100 Great Films That Tell LGBTQIA Stories, is available wherever fine books are sold. It is available at bookshop.org, Barnes & Noble. I believe it'll be at Walmart, which I'm excited as a former Walmart kid.
I love it. There you go, guys. Rush out and get this book. It's an amazing resource to look at. Kyle Turner, thanks so much for being on the Left of Str8 Show, my friend.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, stay on the line, guys. We'll be back with another interview this week, and look for Kyle's 5 questions next week, right around that book launch of May 16th. Have a great night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to The Left of Str8 Show. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast distributor, and please give us a 5-star rating so more listeners can find us. You can follow us on social media, and be sure to check out our website, www.leftofstraightradio.com, for contests and other news and information. See you next week.